In this section, we will configure a page that will display a list of all insurance policies and allow the user to filter them by last name. We will configure a real-time query, an application page, and an interaction. A real-time query represents a search of one or more object instances in the EMC document repository. It has outputs and it can have inputs. Experienced EMC Documentum developers may realize this is a GUI-driven way of defining a DQL query, but we don't have to learn the DQL query language. In addition, xCP Designer facilitates the configuration of results lists so you can process the results. So the first thing we need to do is configure a real-time query that returns a list of policies. So, in the xCP Navigator pane on the left, select the Data Services tab. So right-click on the Real-Time Query node and select New Real-Time Query. For label, enter RTQ_policy_search. For primary model, select Business Objects, and in the box below, select Policy, and click Finish. Note that you can change the primary model from the Basics tab of the editor. However, if you do that, any output columns that you've already defined on the Dataset tab will be lost. Select the Dataset tab. The dataset represents the data that will be returned by the query. In the context pane on the right, double-click last name to add it to the set of output columns. Now do the same for first name, end date, coverage, and object ID. Note that adding object ID as an output column is not necessarily required, but it's a good practice while designing an application, as it may come in handy if you decide to bind a components widget or a viewer widget to the currently selected item in the results list. You don't have to show the value in the runtime, and you can always remove it later, although you would have to update any results lists that depend on this query. When I create results lists, I like to enable sorting when the user selects the column headers. So select the last name column header, and in the Properties pane at the bottom, under the Sort section on the right, check the box next to Enable Sorting. And then you can select the ascending or descending order. You can also select one column as the default sort column for the query. I like to do this also. Select the first name column header and enable sorting for that. Select the end date column header. Now for dates, you generally want to sort them in descending order. And enable sorting for the coverage column as well. Now select the User Inputs tab. These user inputs become search criteria that are used to filter the final results. From the Context Data pane at the right, either double-click the last name field or drag it into the User Inputs area on the left. So you remember the policy search page? This is where we configure the policy search page user input, where the user gets to specify what they're searching for. In the editor canvas, select the policy.lastName entry, and then in the Properties pane at the bottom, change the operator to Contains, and then check the checkbox next to Case Insensitive. Now save the changes and close the Policy Search Real-Time Query editor. The next step is to create an application page and add the query to the page as an interaction. And finally, you'll add a results list widget to the page and bind the interaction to that. In the xCP Navigator, select the User Interface tab. Right-click on the Application UI node and select New Page. For label, enter Policy Search, then click Finish. Expand the Interactions pane and click on the New Interaction button. That's this little green plus symbol. In xCP 2.0, this pane was called Data Services, and you'll still see the term used. In xCP 2.1, interactions represent the RESTful services that provide information to the page from other systems such as the document and repository, and that pass information back from the page to those systems. The inputs contract for each service is a direct representation of the model it relates to, whether it's a business object, process, or whatever. Locate and select the RTQ Policy Search real-time query that you created earlier, then click Finish. What you see in the Interactions pane now is an instance of the Policy Search real-time query. With the RTQ Policy Search interaction still selected, in the Properties pane at the bottom, under the Refresh section on the right, check the checkbox next to On Page Load. If you don't enable this checkbox, then after the page loads, no policies will be displayed until you click the search button associated with the results list added to the next step. We may as well collapse the Interactions pane since we're done with that for now. Now in the Widgets pane on the right, scroll down and double-click the Results List widget. In the Properties pane at the bottom in the General tab, for ID, enter Results List Policy List. And for title, enter Policy List. A lot of people ask what this Enable Drag and Drop checkbox is for. Well, that only has an effect when the results list is showing a list of folders. When your results list is showing a list of folders, and this option is checked, it allows a document to be imported into the target folder from the desktop. At the right, under the Data section, for the Data Service instance, select the RTQ Policy Service interaction. Click OK on the Connect to Data Service Instance dialog that appears. The Results List widget will be updated to reflect both the output and the input attributes of the query, and it automatically added a search button for users to refresh the data. I should take a moment to point out that the Data Service setting for a Results List widget can't be changed once it's set. If you need to change it, you can delete the Data Service instance from the Interactions pane, and then the results list will lose its connection to it. That'll allow you to add another interaction and then bind that interaction with the results list. In the results list, right-click on the Object ID column and select Delete. We're only removing the column from the user interface of the results list widget, but the value will still be available as a value of the selected row in the list at runtime. Select the End Date column. We need to adjust the display format of the date so that it's only the date and not the date and time. In the Properties pane at the bottom, on the right side, scroll down until you see the Format section. For Date Style, select Date Only from the combo box. For the date format, let's select March 8, 2009 with a star next to it. The star indicates that it will display a localized date. Save the Policy Search page and close the editor.